So we are live. Yeah, you
Okay.
can start.
We welcome you all to today's webinar series on gender and sexuality, organized by Anna Jury. I am Dr. Kiran Keshamurthy, and I currently teach English at the Department of Humanities and Social Sciences at IIT Guwahati. Before I introduce today's speaker, let me say a few words on the organization. Anajuri is a non-profit platform to engage and promote various kinds of initiatives like striving for social change, leadership building, entrepreneurship in Assam and the Northeast. During the course of the last 6 months, a few months rather, we have invited speakers engaged in a wide range of fields with the intention of creating a space where people working in the Northeast can interact and work with each other. We welcome you to today's webinar by Dr. Monisha Behal, a pioneering Indian social activist working for women's empowerment in Assam, Nagaland, and neighboring states in eastern India. She's a founding member of Northeast Network, a women's rights organization linking rural and urban women. Come and join us to know her inspirational journey and her work towards uplifting the women of the Northeast. It is a pleasure and honor to have you with us, Dr. Behal. So Dr. Behal will speak for a little while, and then we can entertain questions, if any, from the audience.
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. All right. So thank you, Najori. Thank you, Million. Thank you, Kiran, for inviting me. I'm quite new to the webinar, but thankfully I don't have to see everybody, and it's very different from a usual hall and things like that, and you can just be at ease, I guess. So I was asked to talk about the kind of work that I do, and it's now many years. I started my work with research way back in 1978, if I can remember well. And it was all very interesting, 78, because, I was working, doing a lot of research in parts of Assam. And after that, I think the real knowledge came for me when I was in Delhi. By 78, 79, I was in Delhi, of course, and I was already married then, 1977. But by 1980, I met up with a person called Dr. Veena Mazumdar and Ila Bhatt. These are people who I think a lot of feminists will know, and they were the actual stalwarts. But what I admire in them is how democratic they were, and that's the first lesson I learned actually. That when you are in an organization, you have to look at everybody equally and not have a bell next to the table and ask for the peon to come or ask people to come and then talk to them, talk down on them. No, that wasn't the way I worked. With Veena Mazumdar, she had started a thing called the Center for Women's Development Studies. And what I learned first was to actually do some research, and that was first through reading on family studies. Those were the times when there were different trends, and sociologically, there was a big school which talked about peasant studies. Then came family studies. Then, of course, came issues of women in development. Then came gender and development, and that's how it progressed. So I started, I think, with this issue of family studies. And I read up people who Veena had told me to read these people and said, why don't you write now something about it? And that's how I learned. I was not that young. I was already married and I had children, but it was a learning for me. And the second thing that was very important for me was that she sent me to places like Ahmedabad and other places where I had to present papers. And I was really very, very stage shy. But I realized that when you know when you say what you understand, then the words come out quite easily. And that was a huge, for me, that was a relief, because when you understand what you are saying, then it's okay. You don't have to learn things by heart. That's how it went on. But my main thrust now comes into the whole world of women. And if I talk about Northeast, for me, it was a great experience. I traveled all over Assam by bus, not by train, by bus. And sometimes I would take lifts from my young cousins. I would promise them a bottle of beer if they took me by motorcycle to far off villages, which they did. They obliged me. Because that time we didn't have these kind of grants where you go and get a big grant and then you can go by taxi and things. And I think those kinds of transport and communication wasn't quite available that time in Assam. So my research in Assam was something which was a revelation. And along with that, I started reading about the history of women's movements, which I felt, which I think started in Manipur definitely, and then into other places, because Manipur, you have women who actually got together and um, uh, protested against a certain kind of tax that was levied. Then they protested against the deputy commissioner, and they carried on and on like that. But then what is important in Assam was the national movement. And I think it was Gandhi's influence which made the Assamese population extremely, dedicated to the cause of non-violence. And I'm not saying that people were really non-violent, nothing like that. But I'm just saying that this whole philosophy of non-violence was there. And what I can see was that women in Assam were allowed, they had the space to join the national movement, at least in Assam, when I talk about Assam. And it was definitely because of Gandhi. Because when Gandhi came in 1921, he was so impressed with the weaving that women do. And he said that, I mean, this is a very hackneyed term that everybody uses, that, women weave dreams. But he said also one thing, that if we have women who are, I think, probably about 48% or 50% of the population, and when you start working with women and if they contribute, then they are progressing towards national movement, and they will contribute doubly in comparison to men. So it will be a full national movement for freedom from the British. So this was the trend at that time, an ideology of freedom of expression, and women were actually they were given space to join the movement. And I was lucky to know some people as a child. I was very young, but my mother told me that she's the one who would dress up in men's clothes, and she went underground, and I didn't know what underground meant. Then she told me that this woman, her name was Sarna Mohanta, she actually went underground to work with the Assamese village people against the British. And this, later on in life, it reminds me of the way many of my friends who joined the Naxal movement did quite the same. So it's like that. Every generation has their day. And that's how it was. But what later on, when I was reading about Assam and did this kind of field work, I went out of Assam and I started doing field work in UP. And it was one of the most, I won't say backward, no, it's very disadvantaged in terms of the caste system. Women were in parda, they were not allowed to talk to men. If a man crossed the road, she would go and sort of pay obedience to him. And for me, it was something I could not even fathom. Even if I read sociologists like M.N. Srinivas, I read people like Iravati, and all these kind of people, all these sociologists, and it was the reality of working in this village in Karimganj, which is in a place called Mainpuri district. I actually realized how difficult life was for the average Indian because of the caste system. And this is what actually, when I came back to Assam, I realized that half the battle is already won for us, because women did not suffer the way that the women of UP had suffered, the way I saw them, and I think they still suffer like that. And the two things that got me thinking was, one is your public life and one is your personal life. So when your life cycle as a little girl, when you grow up, if your parents are liberal, if they let you do what you want, it's you grow up freely. And I think that's what I have seen in amongst our indigenous communities in Assam. Definitely, a lot of people will say no, but the Assamese are patriarchal, the Boros are patriarchal, Karbis are patriarchal, so are the Mishings. Of course, there is patriarchy going on everywhere. In Nagaland too, it's like that. But the subtle difference I saw between a woman of northern India and a woman of Assam was that she had the space to speak, and she had the space to be with other women to do collective work. And this is a form of, for me, when I started this organization, Northeast Network, along with my friend Rashmi, for me, it was an important thing that we think of collective decision making, collective articulation of our rights, etc. And this I learned from Northeast India, that you do any income, when you do some earning, when you're looking after livestock, when you're looking after your agriculture fields, it's all done collectively. And that's how I felt that your public life and your personal life, when you put it together in a place like the Northeast, it is a little bit easier than with Mainpuri, what I saw, because Mainpuri for me was a shock which I could not get over. And when my 4 months was over, I said to myself, what do we do about this? And that's the time, 1980s, was the time when the women's movement was really surging in the other parts of India. Starts off with a custodial rape that took place of a woman, a young girl called Mathura. And I think all of you know that 32 women's organizations addressed it, and they fought with good lawyers with them, people like Lotika Sarkar and Upendra Bakshi and all these people who fought, and these men were booked, and so that's how I felt that structurally the women's movement is going parallel to the 1970s and 80s especially. But at the same time, in the village level, if your public and your private life, if you have space, then you can be a part of that movement too. This is what I felt very much. So when I went back to Assam, I wanted to find out whether the Mahila Samitis, whether the Myra Paibis, whether the Sinjuk Kinthe of Meghalaya, the women's groups in Assam, I wanted to find out whether they would be are a part of this national women's movement. I call it national because it was so many cities and so many regions of India that got together to fight violence against women, to fight custodial rape and things like that. And I could see that, yes, I remember my mother's age, people of my mother's age, they belong to a thing called the All India Women's Conference. And it was a part of women's groups, pretty elite, I would say, and they were definitely looking into issues of national movement. But when I looked at Mahila Samitis, the gap I found in the Mahila Samitis that very few women knew what was happening outside about these custodial rapes, about the Dowry Act, about the Immoral Trafficking Act and things like that. And so I realized that whatever we were doing as a Mahila Samiti was a more welfareist way of functioning. It was social welfare. So when Nehru came in, if he brought out this thing called Mahila Mandals. And I remember when I looked up, when I was studying about women's organizations in Assam, I found that 1954 onwards, all these Mahila Samitis were registered. Why so? Because Nehru had said in 1952 that there has to be a uh, community development program when there has to be the formation of Mahila Mandals. So it was really difficult for women of Bihar and all to form into a group. But our women in Assam, I'm only talking about Assam right now. I knew very little about Nagaland at that time. The women in Assam, they were already working as a collective, whether it's fishing, whether it's looking after granaries, whether it's weaving, they work collectively. So as soon as Nehru brought out this blanket program, community development program, there came in the women's organization and got registered. It was an easy thing to do. So, but that's the beauty of collective work. Because they were registered, Nehru and people started this thing called the study circle. And what was the study circle? At that time, I was young, but when I look at it in retrospectively, study circle was about teaching the women to be good mothers and to train their children well. So it was about motherhood. And for them, motherhood meant, for the policy makers, it meant that if you feed your child well, if you look after your well, then it tantamounts to a nation building of healthy children, healthy population. That's the way. So very subtly when you look at it, it was not about the empowerment of women. No. At that time, everything was welfare, women's welfare. So these study circles were like that, but every generation has their way of thinking. So I cannot criticize what happened in 1952 or 1955, because what happened was a progress in that way. And for me in Assam, I grew up with my mother's friends and all who were active. They were active, and it was all in the name of Gandhi. I remember as a child when I was studying in that little kindergarten called the Tezpur Mahila Samiti in the school. There were posters and posters, illustrated posters of Gandhi, of how he was in South Africa, what he did as a lawyer, what he did in the villages, and finally the killing by Godse. And I used to just stare at that picture and look at it. And I now, when I look at it again, my parents' generation were completely, which ideologically went with what Gandhi had to say. Non-violence. They talked about welfare. They talked about women, but it was about motherhood, etc. So I'll switch from there to very quickly to say about what I feel about the women's movement, I became very critical that in Assam we have women's organizations, but they never questioned patriarchy. They never questioned the unequal relationships between what they have in their villages, the work that they do, but never getting recognized for it. And, even with the constitution, if anybody read that constitution, it should have hit them that this is what we are supposed to do. But I don't remember any Mahila Samiti even questioning that. And I realized that society in general accepted these Mahila Samitis as a part of their status quo, being proud that, we have women's organizations. Even in Manipur, when I was there, between 2002, 3, and 4, everybody was proud about the Myra Paibis, but only at their convenience. They were proud of the Myra Paibis, but when I talked about working with them and empowering them and for them to question patriarchy, in Manipur, I remember vividly in a seminar room, some men saying that, oh, but Myra Paibis, you see, they are old, they are very emotional. These are the two things they said. They're old, they are emotional, and they don't know their rights or something like that. And so I realized that everywhere in India, we have the same kind of a thing. Anyway, to go a little bit further than that, if we look at the women's movement, I think at that time, if you look at the whole world, we had the United Nations, we had the academic exercises articulated by different economists and all, and they all spoke about women. Women in agriculture, the issue of poverty, the rights of women, etc. So the combination of the United Nations, the academic interest on women, and then government of India, thankfully, they in the 6th five-year plan decided that women should not just be participating in agriculture work, but they should be a part of it. They should be integrated with it. So I remember World Bank had a thing called, was it TRISAM? I'm forgetting. World Bank had programs for women, but they were always the non-worker. This time with the 6th five-year plan, women became a part of the farming community. And that was the good news about it. I think this is something I need to say, that along with the progress of women, of the women's movement, we also have the academic people, the United Nations and the government of India, which started integrating women's issues as an important population of India, of the populace. That's the way I look at it. I don't know if I should say anything else. Can you ask me any question after this?
Sure. Are you done, Dr. Behal? Would you like to say anything more? Anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, I just need to say something. One more thing I want to say. I would like to.
Sure.
I have talked about the past. I was a young woman then. And I won't say that things were wonderful when I was young. The women's movement was great and all. Definitely, if we compare the past with the present, the huge difference now we see is that the violence has doubled, tripled, and all that. But what is very dangerous is the impunity in which people commit crimes. That is something which was not acceptable in previous years. Having said that, if I look at Assamese society, yes, we say we are not communal, etc. But I'm sorry to say that in the past few years, the feeling that she's so-and-so is a Muslim and so-and-so is a Boro, so-and-so is Adivasi, I am the best. This kind of communal feelings have really heightened in the past few years. And organizations like us who don't advocate these kind of things and who discourage these things, I feel sorry that when we progress 7 steps, we are going back 8 steps. That's what's happening now in our state. And there has to be something done with it. This is a problem I'm facing, we are facing. But I think there are other parallel women's groups which have come up. They address the issue of LGBT rights, transgender rights. They have addressed the issues of what is the word for it? Independence for single women and things like that. And I think the more parallel groups that come up, the more we need to be united. When I say parallel, I don't want to say that they're different from us or anything like that. No, it's nothing like that. But I think the more ideas that come up, the more we can be together. I think this is all I can say, unless there are some questions then I can answer.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Behal, for walking us through your journey. It has been very interesting and fascinating to hear you speak. And it has also been interesting to hear speakers of your generation. And I can sense the palpable excitement in your voice when you talk about the 70s and the 80s and how much you have learned and discovered through your travels, especially when you talk about a time when people used public transport and what it meant to you to make long bus journeys across the countryside. And also your observations on the ways in which caste has divided the population in more than one way across the mainland, and also the contrast that you draw between the mainland as well as the northeast. So it's actually quite fascinating and true, a lot of what you say. But let me just begin by asking you a few questions on what you have said. One of the things that I noticed was the fact that you said that women's organizations have not questioned patriarchy. And you were talking about these samitis and the ways in which they have, in some sense, not addressed the question of patriarchy. So maybe if you could address that question a little bit. I mean, what made you? What do you think could have been responsible for their silence? Why were they silent, and what were they doing to resist patriarchy in all its forms?
No, it is a fact that the Mahila Samitis which came up, I think the first one came up in 1915. Yes. Came up in 1915, yes. And then it carried on. But can you hear me?
Yes, absolutely.
In Mahila Samitis came up, informal Mahila Samitis, and then they got registered. They all got, even Tezpur Mahila Samiti, I'm from Tezpur and I have a lot to do with Tezpur Mahila Samiti because my mother was also there. I was very influenced by them. They were not registered till 1928, I think. Yeah. But if I look at Mahila Samitis, I basically think it's a middle class, comprises middle class women. And even when you go down to the primary Mahila Samitis of the villages, these women who form the Mahila Samitis were also wives of, the landed gentry, the people who had influence, etc. And so it wasn't, I called it at that time when I was young, and I was writing about them in the 70s. I said that these are grassroots women and this is how they were. But I realized that when the years were progressing, I could feel that these women's organizations, the Mahila Samitis, never mind their importance, how good they were, but I realized that very sadly that they never questioned inequalities. They never questioned the power structure. And one of the biggest examples I can give of this kind of a thing was when I think it happens in Nagaland also. When I visited Nagaland for the first time in '94, when you're in a gathering and when there are people talking, the women sit back. But when you go and meet the women outside that complex, that village council, or then they talk about their own life and things like that. And so I realized that it is a culture not to talk in front of the power structure, in front of village authorities and things like that. And this is what I found with village Mahila Samitis all over Assam. And I think it also reflects very well on people like my mother, people who are middle class women, who always taught us that, if you are suffering from something, short of saying patriarchy, you have to be tolerant. And this is reflected again in the Hindi films of the 50s and of the 60s. It's only now that when you see films, the latest film, that you find that women are actually questioning, the patriarchy. So I think this carried on for a long time. And there's so many examples I could give. And I remember one story where we were training women about silkworms, silkworm rearing. And, it so happens that when you are rearing the silkworms, you keep it in a dollar, in a bamboo tray. And when you see it grow and you keep feeding the worm with mulberry leaves, it grows fatter and fatter and fatter. And then finally you are becoming a butterfly and things like that. And it so happened that these women, when they were getting trained, in between we used to tell them about issues of violence. This is in Tezpur. We used to talk about violence. We used to talk about the law. And it happened for 40 days, this training. One woman, when she went back home after the day's training, and she went home, she was received by a very sullen, sulky husband, saying that, you've come now, you haven't made food for me, you haven't done this for me. And he was so angry when she replied back that he took that tray and he stamped on it and he killed those worms. Whereupon this woman, she was yelling and she was crying as if she was in mourning, as if somebody had died. The women came running and they said, it's a personal affair, let her be. The next day, they talked about it and they said, look, during the training in Tezpur, we also learned about violence. We learned about the law. We learned about our rights. So they went back to the husband and they said, we are going to be confronting you on two issues: that you have been violent against your wife, number one, and number two, you have destroyed the property of our Mahila Samiti. The property means the silkworms. For me, that was an achievement of a lifetime, that these women were actually able to speak. And that is how, we learn from examples of this type. And I think when we take examples like this, now we have, Northeast Network has thousands of examples like this. And I'm so happy that our team, the Northeast Network team, is following that ideology of looking at inequalities, talking about it, explaining to people whenever they can. So silence is something which is now, I think people are stopping, but even now, we need to address it. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Let me just ask one more question before we take questions from the audience. I think one more intervention that you have made, I think I read somewhere that you have been engaging quite keenly with the question of voting, of Naga women and voting, and their position in terms of panchayats and local bodies. So maybe if you could just say a few words about your own engagement with those issues.
Well, it's a very difficult task. Naga Naga society is very patriarchal, and the issue of voting, of being in the electoral rolls for women has been a very difficult one for one simple thing, and that is the men have said that women cannot be so because that is. Can you hear me?
Yes, absolutely.
But you cannot be so, number one, because it's a customary law not to have women in any village authority. And this I've seen with Meghalaya, this I've seen with Manipur, this I've seen with the Karbis, with the Mishings and everybody, with the Kebangs and all. Women somehow in tribal society are not really allowed in as a part of the village governance. And when I say tribal, I don't mean that Assamese people are different, because Assam, the panchayat system also has that. Of course, the law is saying something else. So when we addressed this, we had invited somebody from the National Commission for Women, if I remember correctly. And along with that, we also had some very important young women of Nagaland to talk about it. And the whole issue came up about this act called the 371A in the Constitution, which says that there's a special case of Nagaland that if the customary laws of the Nagas should be protected. So this was an excuse of a lot of men, especially women, the men in Mokokchung area. The community there said that under no circumstance can women ever be in a part of this electoral role, because there's a customary law saying that. And when the women tried to challenge this idea, there have been instances in Kohima also where the one or two houses of these women were burnt. There was a lot of lawlessness. And, I must say, we are not brave hearts or anything like that. We were really scared about it. That what do you do? Because you are actually confronting and a whole, you can say the whole, when you talk about the panoramic view of Nagaland, you're also looking at this entire view of all the Naga men of Nagaland who were right standing to their ground saying that we will not allow this to happen. So, Northeast Network is not confrontationist. Even in our own ideology, we say we cannot confront with a fight or a protest. But we had negotiations, and there's a very good example about that. We had negotiations, but it didn't really quite work. But what happened is in the village where we work, Chizami, we did have an example of village women becoming a part of the village council, of the village development board, etc. Of course, in the 1970s, there was a guy, a gentleman called Gokhale, IS officer. He brought in the village development board, and there they had a percentage of women to become secretaries, etc. But about the larger issue of elections, it has been a huge confrontation for us, and a lot of we have really lost out in that way. I don't know how much of this battle we can win, but we are trying to convince people still.
Okay.
And also the church, I need to talk about the church. The church is a very powerful unit of Nagaland, isn't it? The church also needs convincing, don't you think? So we need to convince the church, the youth leaders and everything, and I'm sure it will work, but it will only work if people like us do exemplary work. And I know that with Chizami, my colleagues, Akole Seno, all my colleagues there, we had one winning battle. I know that from 1998 onwards, they have been saying that the wages of women and men should be the same. Must be 10 rupees difference. It doesn't matter. They didn't do it, but I think in 2014, sometime in January, the village council announced that the wages of men and women in that village would be equal. Again, that's an achievement, isn't it? That's the way we should progress. Yeah.
Okay, I just have a few questions for you from the audience. One question is from Milin, which is what motivated you to start the Northeastern Network, and what were your challenges then, and what are your challenges now?
Very frankly, I was, I was very committed to the work with women from the 70s, 78, 79. And finally, when I realized that there were many impediments with Tezpur District Mahila Samiti. And when I say impediments, it means that when I wanted to work outside Darang district, at that time it was Darang, now it's Sunitpur. When I wanted to work outside Darang district, they would say, no, you're from Tezpur Jila Mahila Committee, Tezpur District Mahila Samiti, so you can't work beyond that. And that's when I realized that, no, this is not the way we have to work further and extend this network. And so that's how Northeast Network came out. By 92, 93, it was forming, but by 1995, it got registered. So that's how it is. That's the question.
And I think there was a question about the challenges you face. What were the challenges you faced then, and what are your challenges now?
The challenges at that time faced, I won't call it challenge. It was all very exciting, actually.
Okay.
Everything was very exciting. Challenges are there, of course, but I never had a bad experience, even from people who were from the underground or anything. And I realized that if you're honest, and if you talk about what you are doing, I think it works. So maybe I'm just being a romantic and being very ideal, because people have had very bad experience. But the challenge is still about this whole issue of conservatism and the ideology of women being at home. And I very much, question sometimes the Assam government who brought out this thing of, what is it called? Arundhati or something about, bringing up, giving gold to women after 18, from 18 onwards. I mean, what did that mean? What did that show? Gold for what? To the girls, so that they get rich. What was it about? It was actually going back to patriarchy, that girls have to get married, and once they get married, they'll get the gold. But here we have a Hima Das. Here we have bright young women who are boxers and motorcyclists and doing all kinds of wonderful things. And then the parents go and say, hey, you don't have to do all this. You go and get married so that we can get those how many tolas of gold. So, it's a very regressive policies when they come up by the Assam government. I was shocked that no women's organization I'm going to talk about organizing, but the young students didn't even, they didn't even protest about it. Maybe they thought, oh, wow, what a beautiful gift our girls are going to get. But we have to question these fundamental things, isn't it? And this is the reason why I feel it's very challenging to somehow convince young women that we have to take a path of equality, we have to have freedom of expression. Only then you can get you can have space to progress in life, isn't it?
Thank you. Then there is another question about from Mehrjabeen Rahman, which is that what role do you think an NGO plays in a woman's life? And the second question is also by the same person, asking, about that women have been active, activists since the pre-independence period. She is asking you if you think whether women are being acknowledged for their contributions despite being on the front line of various movements.
And the first question was about how do NGOs...
About what? Yes, what do you think? What role do you think an NGO plays in women's lives?
Well, to answer her very directly, your whole life as an activist, as in an NGO, it is completely determined by the ideology that the NGO has. If the NGO is democratic, go ahead. If you can dress the way you want, go ahead. If you have to go somewhere, be like me, don't go by bus. Take your cousin brother and go in a motorcycle, give him a beer and go. Do the work. This is the way we were brought up. And I think it's very important for an NGO to be an organization, to be democratic, to shed off all these terrible inhibitions that women have. That they can't go out, they can't do this and things like that. So I think, Major Bean, it's the way the NGO treats you that you should be like that. But there is a point of order. We are an NGO, okay? It has been something for me to bring in a thing called point of order. And one of the biggest things I tried to convey to my team members was that you do your activism, but please do your homework. Substantiate your facts when you confront the government. Substantiate your facts when you have to talk to the police. If you're trying to protect a woman in the street, substantiate that fact by saying Article 354 is saying this. What do you say? You can then question the police. And it has been wonderful because the police suddenly realized that, oh, these females know what they're talking about. And that's when, you are a winner. So I think it's very, very important for an NGO to have a point of order, to have an ideology, but also to do a lot of reading, comparing your NGO with other NGOs, never to look at each other in confrontation, but to learn from each other. That I think we are all a part of a very large fraternity now of women's organizations, and I think we share a lot of things because the problems are the same, isn't it?
Then there is another question which asks you about the nature of the recent cases that in which your organization has made interventions.
Recent cases of what?
I guess the question is talking about. So this is by a person called Moni Konkona Changmai. So she's asking you about what she. I guess recent cases concerning women, gender, violence,
when we look
political
at,
rights.
When we look at women, and every time we protest, it's against violence. Yesterday, a woman was raped. There was acid thrown on her face. We've got the pictures, which is gruesome, and she was killed. What happened after that was that our people in the field in Udalguri, they collected 80 women and they got 80 signatures, and they're condemning the whole thing. Now, if they have condemned it, it's a fantastic thing, yes. But what we are also going to demand from the Legal Services Authority is for a compensation for the woman who died, for the family. So it's when you do your homework, and you know that the Legal Services Authority has to give 3 or 4 lakhs to the aggrieved woman, to the woman who's dead now, that the family will get compensation. That's when the movement goes on. This is one example I'm giving you. So with violence, whether it's Meghalaya or Nagaland, we've had these problems and it has been terrible. But I really feel that once again, if you substantiate these facts and talk to the police, talk to the government and challenge them, with that intellect that you have, I think it works better. To talk about left movements, we can be sympathetic about it, but with the present scenario, things have been very, there's been an upheaval. There's been a lot of serious thought about how people in the left movements are going, in which way they are going, because every time they say something, they become anti-national. And this is something we don't expect from a democratic country like India. And I think as a women's organization, we talk about these issues, not about leftism or rightism and all, but we talk about the issue of globalization and how it has completely victimized us. How we are now victimized in the sense we have become a puppet of so many things. I mean, today's webinar, I think, is also something which I would never even think I would be talking like this, but that's how it has happened. So I think it's very important that whether you're a left, right, or anything, you have to see that you look at every human being with equal eyes, and they all are the same. And there has to be this whole issue, what I call gender equality, which you don't find still in many parts of the world.
And then there's just one more question as of now, which is whether the NEN has been doing any thing or making any interventions in the wake of the pandemic.
Only two things.
Yes, yes, please. Please. Yeah,
with
please.
the pandemic, first thing, it's thrown everybody off their rockers, you know.
Yes.
All of us don't even know what has hit us. I'm only very happy that these, you know, the animals are left alone, the vegetation is left alone, the trees are still surviving. Otherwise, it would have been a disaster. All right. But what we did was we wrote a first letter on the 4th of April. I took a personal initiative of writing to hundreds of friends, saying this is what happening. In Karbi Anglong, there is a young guy who has to feed people because they have run away from somewhere. They've come from Dimapur. So and so needs help. There's nothing to eat with the lockdown, 24th March. And as soon as we wrote to these people, money started coming in, and the money we channeled it through a Green Hub, which is a sub-project run by Rita Banerjee, my friend. And they manage this money. And I'm only happy that many people have given us money, and I feel happy because they trust us, that not a single penny has gone astray, number one. And the food that we have given has been distributed. Now, how do I go to Gulaghat when I'm sitting here in Tezpur or Guwahati? So we had this thing, these girls did it, not me. They went and through net banking gave the money to the dukandar, to the ration fellow, and the contact person in Gulaghat would collect the thing, and that's how distribution takes place. Now the relief work has now almost finished. It's petering out. We helped some friends, like there are people in Jorhat who spoke about migrants coming in from Mon district and Mukokchung. So we helped in that, and also provided professional masks to the ASHA workers, etc. But what happens now is, what is the post-lockdown period? And one example is that we've talked about bringing in multiple securities, but it's very difficult because the floods are on, the blowout is going on there in Bagjan, and many things are happening. But we have thought about the little patches of land that women have, men have. We should make use of that. So it could be about homestead gardens. It could be about, it could be about doing a little livelihood program about weaving, getting yarn, trying to sell it online. That's a new thing now, online and all that. These are the things. But what I want to also say is, in Chizami again, there's a quarantine center there. And what the team has done there with the village council is they have brought out creativity workshops, so that while you are in that quarantine period, let your mind excel in something else instead of sitting there and having your cigarette or biri or whatever. So what they did was they gave people opportunity to make something or to write poetry or to do something, and it has worked out very well. The Indian Express has brought it down, and these are the kinds of things that we have to do post lockdown. But I think we have to really help each other. And I'm again, I live in a society. I feel a little bit bad that when you go out of the building, you find a lot of poor people, a lot of stray animals there, and middle class society people want to keep everything to themselves. And if you go out to feed somebody, they'll say, "Oh, you'll bring the virus." If you feed that dog, you'll be bringing the virus. And so I think in India, people have to open their minds and become more human, to have some fellow feeling for each other. Otherwise, things won't work with this pandemic. Everybody will try and just stick to themselves.
There's another question by Dibarani, which is asking you about what you think. What do you think are the key achievements of your journey or of your organization? Yeah.
I think the key achievement for me personally, because I was really very frustrated as a young woman that how is it I'm in Delhi and these people don't even know what the hell or Nagaland is about or what is happening with Assam. And here I'm reading stories about Manipur women in 1904, movement against the government, movement against that. And so whenever there was an opportunity, I would give slideshows and talk about the Northeast. And unfortunately, I think it is perhaps there was a lot of conflict in Northeast. You know that. Whenever I remember in the 1970s when the movements were going on, I remember when I had to go from Tezpur, if I have to go to a place called Rota, then they will, then there's a Boro bond. Bond is for 1,000 hours. So you have to calculate how many days that is, It was like that. So it's so conflict ridden. And these are the things that we had to talk to the outside world about Northeast. And when I did that, I felt that people could not really understand what I was saying till 2002 happened. Do you know, any of you know what happened in 2002? In 2002, a lot of women were raped and killed in Gujarat. They were raped and killed in 2002. And it was a genocide. And it was so stark. Muslim women were killed, and it was a horrible thing that had happened. And that is the time when people in the women's movement were actually starting to, I could hear them saying that the conflict situation is like that, like Northeast. And it was only then it suddenly dawned on them what conflict means. Otherwise, it was about other things, about earning, exploitation, dowry death, custodial death. But this was a pogrom, this was a genocide, and therefore they were able to make a comparison between their issues of this genocide that took place with the conflict in Northeast. That was a realization for me that this is how people are starting to talk about Northeast. So somewhere Northeast got the picture, but this is my personal reading. I'm not saying that it is a historical fact or anything. This is my personal experience, and I said, hey, what's happening? They're comparing this genocide with Northeast conflict.
Kiran, are you there? think he might. Okay.
Sorry, yes, I forgot to unmute myself. Yeah. So there's another question, which is from Milan, which says, what is your future dream? Will NEN have a branch in each of the northeastern states? And what is your message for the younger generation, specifically younger women?
Yeah. No, about the near future, I think I'd leave it to my state directors, our different project directors. I'm very hopeful that they extend, because Northeast Network is, it has expanded a lot. In Nagaland, we have expanded to many districts. We are working with street vendors. We are working here. Then in Assam, we are working in different villages on issues of violence. But we also have this thing called the Green Hub. I would call it the first digital archive in the Northeast. Many people might not know about Green Hub, but it has done wonders in Tezpur. Every year, 20 young people, boys and girls, come and learn about filmmaking. But it's not, again, filmmaking, not just the technology. It's about social issues. It's about wildlife conservation. And I'm so happy that many young boys and girls are now talking about the Dihing Patkai. They're talking about saving the Bagjan. They're talking about Dibang. They're talking about animals. In Karbi Anglong, with sand mining going on, with animals chota animals being killed and sold out. They have young Green Hub fellows who are talking against it, and how they show with the stuff that they have learned, they screen films about all this. So I feel that the future is good. I don't think in my lifetime I can even think of having any expanded, go to different states. But definitely our team members are there. They are senior people now. When I say senior, not by age, they're in their 40s. But they are dynamic people. They can go anywhere they want. I mean, if people can go abroad and give talks, that's wonderful. Nen is doing that. Nen is showing films to the world. So even if we are not expanding anywhere else, the cause is there. The thing about the younger generation is, again, to be, especially young girls, it's extremely important, young women, to know what your space is. You have to see that your parents give you the space. You have to see that your boyfriends also give you the space, because if they're possessive, just out of there. But you have to see that you are an independent person. You can enjoy companionship, isn't it? If you give each other space, and I think that's what a healthy relationship is. And I'm very, very, very keen that whatever we do, many girls have left Northeast Network. There's one young girl who's joined the government. And I know, I've got faith in her that the moment she starts working, she'll be addressing issues of gender. And somebody told me many years back in 1999 or 2002 or something, I was telling somebody that this girl, she's left NEN, what should I do? And so this cousin of mine said that, the population of India is so big that if this girl has gone out, she'll do something really good there. And also you won't have a problem getting new people in Northeast Network. And with that belief, I realized that when people leave, it's not for anything, but they will contribute something elsewhere, isn't it? That's the way I think of it.
And there's just one more question, which is that were there any cases of domestic violence that were reported during the pandemic?
Yeah, you should ask our state director and then our project directors and all. There were, from March 24th till now, there must be about 30 cases. But one case is a woman in Gulaghat whose husband violated her so much that she took her little baby and ran out to the highway. And then she phoned us up. We told the police, and that's how she was rescued. And she's back in her mother's house, whereas this man went and took the baby and snatched the baby and went back to his house. So the baby was also retrieved and brought back. And we are trying to figure out, it's not so hard to figure out why violence takes place, because very sadly men have always been regarded as what I think Mulayam Singh Yadav said, that boys will be boys. We take it for granted that the boys will drink, that the men will drink, that they will go out, and so when they go home they become frustrated and therefore they batter up their wives. That's not the way it should be, isn't it? So here we have to talk about our own frame of mind, our ideology, our whole issue of equality and well-being. So we found many cases of violence, and they have been reported. But I must say, the police have been also very helpful. And the one achievement is that a standard operating procedure has come about in May 21, 2020, after really, badgering at the IS officers and other officers, that you bring out an SOP against distressed women, because there's so much violence going on. Assam is the first state that has done it, and I believe Assam is the first state in the whole of India to bring out an SOP against very vulnerable and distressed women and abused women. So that way, hats off to my team members who went out of their way to really struggle with these officers, So let's see. I hope the SOP comes out. It has come out, but there are two things missing. And sorry again to be so discouraging. There are no guidelines really there, and there is no protocol, and there is no funding for it. So if a woman is abused, and this beautiful SOP is there with 13, articles there, how do you save the woman? Because the funding is not there and the guidelines haven't come. See, these are the travails of government notifications.
Dr. Behal, do you have any more time to answer any more questions?
Yes, I can. I don't know what's the... Yeah, it's 7.
It's 7:10, yeah. So there's one more question by Deepika Dwara, which says that there is no proper punishment for those who commit rape. And she's talking about the case of Damini, and she is wondering whether encounter killings is the only or the best option to punish these people. What are the ways in which these victims or these rape survivors, can get justice?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yes, different people have a different thing, but this thing about encounter killing is something I would never even go for. I would never vouch for that. But definitely there are very stringent laws now about it, about rape, etc. But I had an American woman who had come to give a lecture. And what she said was very different. She said a rapist was actually counseled and he was given space to do work which was creative, etc. Now, when it comes to all that, in India, we don't even have that. When you think about the hundreds of people, for example, who are in jail, there's COVID-19 going on. I mean, they don't have, there is no space for them to be given those opportunities. So that American dream stayed there with me, but I was thinking how good it would be. But I think we would never vouch for these kind of encounter killings or anything like that. And I think the punishment that should be given for rape is already there. Lots of women's feminist organizations have talked about it. I am not so knowledgeable about it. My girls might be knowing, but that's my answer.
Thank you. And then there is another question, which is that from Hina Shri. I wanted to know your experience as you've worked in the interiors of the state about how the communities look at rape and domestic violence and those who survive them. What can we do to bring normalcy among the people, and how do we treat the survivors? I guess with a healthy attitude, because it's not their fault.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, this issue of violence. Very sorry to say, when a woman, when there is violation against a woman, then normally she is the one to be blamed. Number one, and this has happened in small communities, with Hinduized societies, with tribal societies, because of the patriarchy that's running through our veins. So the woman, I remember a mother and a daughter were walking in the street in near GS Road. It was late, 9:30 at night, and somebody was following them, and they ran to the policeman, and the policeman said, I'll say it in Assamese, "Iman rati ulai se kile aru eta eneke maiki manubur ulai jano. Why are you out at night? Is it proper for women to be out at night at this hour?" This is what the cop asked. So this whole issue of the mindset and the terrible attitudinal behavior that people have, even women have that. A woman might have these kind of ideas, just like a man would, because patriarchy doesn't mean only men are patriarchal. Women can have patriarchal ideas. I can be the most dominating mother and not allow my daughter to go out, isn't it? It's like that kind of a thing. So my advice is, we in Northeast Network are struggling a lot to convince people, and we do it through three things: film screening, we do it through games. There's a game coming up which my friends Rashmi and all are making up. It's a Ludo game, and it's a game on gender. For example, you throw the dice, and if a certain thing comes, there are about 10 of you, and whoever loses the point, he has to go with his group of boys or girls, and they have to study what the sister does in the home for the next 5 days. That becomes a realization of what that girl is going through, isn't it? So these are the things we should do through games, through art, through sports. Let's bring out about 15, 20 Hima Dases out. Let's see what people can see. So what I feel important is the attitude that has to change. And whoever asks this question must try in her own home, outside her home, in the compound, outside on the road, when she's going to a dukan to buy something, to see that you influence as many people as you can on the issue of equality. It's very important, and you have to say it not with confrontation, not in a confrontational way, but in a way which will actually make people think about it.
Okay, so to the participants, if you have any questions, you can ask Dr. Behal right now. You can unmute yourself, raise your hand, unmute yourself and ask questions one by one. If there are any other questions. Any questions?
Don't think so.
All right. Thank you very much, Dr. Behal, for your absolutely stimulating and exciting talk. We hope to have interact with you more, and I'm very grateful that you could share your rich experiences with us. And we wish you all the very best. We hope you keep going for a long time to come. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Bye.
And to thank you all. Yes, thank you all for attending this lecture webinar. See you again for the next series. Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thank you. We will be having webinars on gender and sexuality every Thursday. So please do attend.